Now
okay, now you're out. Now you're out.
Now you're just using the term in the future.
Yes, that's when you do the test. You make a prediction on paper that can then be disproven. You say to somebody, if I've understood the axioms correctly, I predict this will happen.
Test the claim.
Data, when I discover that, I'll pull back. Either way, we're all laymen in most topics.
Sure thing, that's what I said.
Okay, there we go. We have to choose.
But that doesn't stop us.
We have to choose who we're going to trust to some extent.
Sure thing.
Okay? I have to pick an expert. This is not me. This is not either of us using fatuous arguments from authority. It's us doing our best to pick the people we think are the reasonable authorities on a particular subject. I pick the people who can deliver on a topic. People who predictatively, they don't just describe the present to me, but they go, guess what? I'll tell you what will happen in the future. If you do A and B, that'll happen. The guys who predict the future well, I give them some credibility. And within the world of physics, that would seem to be the physics community. I could be wrong, and they seem to be exemplified in the world of Nobel Prizes, etc.
Not sure if there's any Nobel Prize winners in the we predict the future environment. Okay, fair enough, in physics.
Sorry, what?
I'm not sure if there are any Nobel Prize winning future predictors in the physics community.
Then I think, what do you think the scientific method is? What do you think it consists of doing?
It doesn't involve anything to do with predicting the future. I know that much.
Okay, now on
Observation,
that, do you want to repeat that statement, please?
It doesn't contain anything. So the scientific method has nothing to do with predicting the future.
Wow.
Yep. Because if you were to define a scientific method, you wouldn't find predictions or a prophecy to be a component of it.
Okay, so if you
observing the present,
if you use a scientific method, you wouldn't
find
predicting the future to be part of the
not using it if you define it.
Sorry?
If you were to define the scientific methods as to what it is mostly widely, at least in the Western context, agreed to be, the idea of observation, testability, repeatability, you wouldn't find anywhere in that definition that it's possible for you to predict the future as a core feature of the scientific method.
I think even as you're saying these words, you're probably realizing that you're digging yourself into. Finally, you're going to have to.
Go ahead then.
You're either going to have to do a run or retract.
Let's see.
Okay, define for me what you think deduction involves within the scientific method.
Deduction.
Yes.
That doesn't involve future knowledge of the future at all.
Really?
Yes. You start with a series of predicates, potentially.
Yeah.
And then you walk through them one by one and then see where the ultimate conclusion is.
How do you see?
You see what the most consistent results are based upon a variety of factors, both fixed and variable.
And how do you do that?
It varies. What are we talking about? Like
I'll tell you what I think
animals?
I think what you do is formally called an experiment, and the method for an experiment is you write down a hypothesis.
Not always, but you know.
Okay, no, I'm really serious. This is scientific method. This is the inferential method. You go, I've made some observations about reality using induction. I've noticed I think it has some patterns. As you correctly say, you make certain assertions about the core principles in place, like self-consistency. And armed with those, you go, now I'm going to make a prediction using an experiment where I'll make a hypothesis that if I mix nitrogen plus glycerin over there, given my current understanding through induction of these things, I predict in the future it may blow up. Then you do the experiment in the future to test it empirically. Now you're out.
Now you're just using the term in the future.
Yes, that's when you do the test. You make a prediction on paper that can then be disproven. You say to somebody, if I've understood the axioms correctly, I predict this will happen. So, if I've understood the aerodynamics correctly, I predict that aeroplane up there will fly. And 300 people who stood on that thing are standing, risking their lives 3 miles above the Earth because they trust that prediction. That, guess what? The tensile strength of the metal we've tested in the lab through predictions will hold, and the aerodynamics will keep it up, and the fuel integrity will. And these are all predictions which are tested through hypothesis and empirical experimentation. This is the scientific method, and it does involve predicting the future. It's not prophecy, it's accurate prediction. Yeah, I know, prophecy is not in this mix, we're talking physics. It is predicting the future because you think you live in a self-consistent universe.
You're not predicting the future, you're banking on an outcome. That's all it is. So ultimately, you're banking on an outcome. That's all it is. Predicting the future,
evaluating the probability that you've understood the axioms correctly.
So again,
by doing
predicting the future, if you're doing it at some times, like as we know with the vast number of scientific discoveries that we've had, some of them end up in horrible accidents.
So I never said they didn't. It doesn't matter.
So
which you learn
when you're predicting the future,
it doesn't matter
unless you're doing it in an accurate manner, then ultimately the scientific method has nothing to do with predicting the future.
That's incredible. Okay,
Yes.
every experiment, an experiment can't fail. And again, I'm quoting Persig, which I've done before. The function of an experiment is to state a hypothesis and then create a circumstance where you test that hypothesis as diligently as possible. The answer you get is not the point. The point is it's yielding data. If you do the experiment accurately, you will make a prediction as to what will happen, and it will either confirm the hypothesis, which will increase the axiom, or it will disprove it. Either way, it yields. You make the prediction in the hypothesis. You go, I hypothesize that if
You're not predicting the future, you're simply predicting an outcome.
Oh, that's a very subtle distinction.
Unless we are potentially like a mixing the definition here. So, for example,
maybe we're getting our terminology wrong.
Okay,
here's a clear scientific prediction. I predict that if I hit that billiard ball with this amount of force in that direction, it will travel that distance, hit another billiard ball, and move it that direction in that, and that is a prediction. Can you agree that's a prediction?
It's a prediction.
Is that a prediction?
That can only be made.
Is that a prediction?
In a stable environment.
Is that a prediction?
Because you could do it.
Is it a prediction?
You could do it somewhere
where
it was drier, warmer, whatever the case might be.
You have to do the experiment well. Are you making a prediction? Yes or no?
You're making a prediction.
Thank you. You're making.
You're not making a prediction in the future. Because I could say you're going to explode in 4 seconds.
Hang on. He's actually conceded on camera. You are making. You said it. You heard him.
You're making a prediction, but predicting the future is not essential for the scientific method.
And then number two.
I didn't say predictions, I said predicting the future.
Just wind it back. He said, number one, the scientific method does not involve prediction.
I said prophecy as well.
And then number two, he later said you are making a prediction. You can draw your own conclusions.
All right. I said the future.
Do you want to be happy or right?
Sorry?
Do you want to be happy
Ideally
or right?
both, but I think... ideally both.
Ideally both.
Okay.
I think which one more?
Sorry. Do you mind?
Sorry.
Because
I wanted to...
You want to be as close to the truth as possible.
Let me wrap it up, and then you take over. Okay. So, I don't agree with your universalist position because it doesn't yield any kind of actual way.
We're back on universalism.
Yes.
Right? Okay,
do we move away?
Okay.
What are we on right now?
Okay, we were on scientific method objectivity and what constitutes concrete axioms, and I pointed out parsimoniousness and non-contradiction, okay? If you want to move back to the ethics issue, then let me ground it out quickly.
So, you run away from the example of if we have Christianity, again, it's about universalism, Christianity saying abortion, no way, from the very beginning, and Islam saying 40 days or 120, depending on which school you follow. What's the answer? Who was correct?
Maybe neither of you.
Okay, awesome job. Great. So,
or one of you. It would seem that the Muslim position on that particular topic would seem to align more with the scientific consensus at the moment.
Really?
Yes.
So, the scientific consensus follows
at the moment.
That
and I use consensus in the colloquial sense. I don't mean every scientist.
According to the Muslims, that the reason why it is okay to have an abortion up to 40 or 120 days is because that is when Allah sends angels to write down your destiny.
No, I don't believe.
And the scientific community is on par with this, yes?
I don't believe they've got the logic right, but I think they've got the conclusion.
The timing, right?
Okay. What they've done? I'm assuming that your position is the second. If I'm wrong, correct me.
Conception, bam, life.
Right, okay. So your perception is the second the sperm hits the egg, a soul is present. Okay. Because I take, and maybe I'm wrong, consciousness and the soul to be kind of aspects of the same thing, indicative of the same thing, I think that what life occurs in the fullest sense when consciousness can occur, and the science suggests you need a certain level of the central nervous system and neurology to accommodate consciousness. Therefore, it wouldn't make sense for consciousness to enter the child at the point the sperm hits the egg. It will happen further down the line in the evolution of the fetus. Therefore, the Muslims would seem to be more on point because they wait until later, which is what our current abortion laws do. Now, maybe those laws are wrong, but our current abortion laws also go, we think at the initial point it's not a problem to have an abortion, but as time goes by, it becomes more and more critical. So in that sense, on that point, the Muslims are more aligned with the science.
Okay, and then here's where you get called out.
Am I wrong about that?
Yes.
Am I wrong that they're more aligned with the science than you are?
Yes, you are, because
so you're saying the science agrees that you should
simply because
they
have a certain dating correct, and I believe the science even goes beyond 3 months.
Whatever it is, the point is The Muslims and
are
the
not moral
scientists,
aligned
the Muslims,
because they are relying on the idea of predestination being
I don't care about predestination.
sorted out
I care on the
for the
date.
fetus beforehand.
I care on
now,
no, you're ducking. Sorry.
No.
The question
to answer
is.
your problem,
the question is which
if somebody is born and they don't have the ability
share the
to
space.
have
You're not going to
ability,
shut me down. So far,
I'm not
it's
shutting you
gone
down.
well.
Here's
yes,
your problem.
You are. No, I don't
Wait
have
a
a problem
second.
yet until I've
Here's your
summarised where
problem.
we're at.
You have summarized.
You're not going to let me summarise where
Okay.
we're at. The conversation
Go
could end.
ahead and summarize it, but you should hold in the foot.
Excellent.
Because now you're relying on cognitive ability
It's about claiming
to be the thing.
It's about specifying a question very clearly. The question should be, which is closer to the truth? That the soul enters...
which is correct. That's what I said.
You're not allowing me to ask my question. You're not allowing me to ask my question. It's important to phrase the question.
You're changing the question because you're running from it.
I am, because you don't seem
point.
to want to engage in it in good spirit. I'm trying to be meticulous.
Okay, so to summarize,
I want to be meticulous.
you simply just said that which one is correct is the one that backs up, that is backed by science.
I know, and you can use small print to get out of it, so I'll rephrase the question in a
Go
way
ahead.
that you can't use small print.
Go ahead.
But
who's correct?
Which assessment is closer to the truth, according to...
No, who's correct? Because don't forget, you're arguing
because if I ask it
that
way, then you can use small print to get out. I'm now going to make it that you can't run away by asking which position is closer to the truth.
Okay.
And you don't like it phrased that way because now you're cornered and you know... So you won't let me finish the question.
Here's the issue.
Let me finish the question.
How do we get to the truth of the matter?
You won't let me
what are you assuming the truth is?
Because you know I'm going to phrase the question in a way.
Phrase it how you want, and then we can clarify something else at the end.
The first time you contradicted yourself,
now you're running.
You said scientific method doesn't predict prediction. On camera, that was wrong.
Nope, on the future.
Now
That's what I said.
I'm going to re-ask the question.
Don't forget that.
Which analysis is closer to the truth?
That's my question.
According to the scientific community.
Oh, so now science is the truth.
Can I phrase the question?
Okay, all right.
I'm not saying maybe science isn't, but if you value the scientific community the way you do when you use anesthetic, when you get an operation, when you go to the NHS,
medical science, sometimes,
you
but
do
not for everything.
that. Okay, so
for medical science, some things, but not for everything.
So medical science,
for something, sure.
Main consensus seems to be that abortion currently which is closer to the truth? That the soul, that consciousness enters the body at the point the sperm hits the egg, or that the consciousness enters the body at some point further down the evolution of the fetus. Medical science seems to think the latter. You seem to think the former. Therefore, on that particular point, the Muslims are closer to aligning than you are. And how can you be in denial
medical
of this?
Science, unfortunately, is not religious. It does not presuppose a soul.
Sorry, this is an analysis of neurology.
It does not presuppose
in the law
a soul.
on abortion.
It does not presuppose a soul.
I said consciousness.
So
Say it back. I didn't say the soul. I did initially.
You said the soul.
And then I said consciousness.
You said both, actually.
No, the last time I asked it, because I'm being very careful with my language, I then said, if I say soul, it's more contentious. So I said consciousness.
Okay.
And the scientific community think it's more likely that consciousness enters the fetus.
Enters.
Okay. Is activated.
Okay.
Good question. Becomes active in the fetus. Further down the line from the point of conception.
Before something can become activated, it has to be innate in some way. So it's always there. It expresses itself at a different point in time, but it is always there. For example, from the moment of conception, the genetic building blocks for forming a human being.
Example.
The genetic building blocks for forming a human being. Your example isn't doing very well either.
So before I can activate the engine, the petrol in my engine, I have to start with a car which didn't have petrol in there, and then I have to put petrol in. So it's like saying, at what point does the petrol enter the engine so I can activate it?
Bad example, because you're assuming that the consciousness enters within at some point in a metaphysical way.
Pick a word.
Awesome.
Activate.
Great. So now, a better example would be when you're in a car that already has petrol inside, you cannot move it until you engage the engine.
Right. And you believe
there's some time that occurs between you entering the car and engaging the engine.
Metaphorically,
and in the same way, for the fetus,
we need to do a clock. We need to do a clock.
That's fine. Sure.
We need to do a clock.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, go.
Before you talk about abortion and everything, what's the big issue here? The big problem is a good intention, okay? A blessing from God, whatever you do, you two.
Pray to your God, and then I'll help you.
First of all, you have a very clean intention that you're going to look after this person and marry to her. That means you have agreement. You have agreement no matter what between you. If it's happening, if it's something happened in your, there is a
People
pregnancy
don't
or
live on
something,
if, man.
you have to stand to that. You cannot go back to it because you already had made a relationship between these two persons. What do you expect? You expect what do you expect if you have a relationship with this person? Obviously, you're going to end up. The probability will be.
So, with respect,
pregnancy.
I've totally lost the thread of what you're talking about.
No, I'm just saying.
Engage in good faith.
That's all. I'm trying. I'm genuinely not following the thread of what
Can I
you're
just
talking
put
about.
one question to all of you? One simple question, please. And that's the end.
I'd like it. We're going to do one thing at a time.
Please.
Do you mind if? Sorry, can you repeat your point?
Okay.
Succinct. What's the topic?
The topic is before you start doing anything, especially starting a relationship with someone, you have to have an agreement between you and Allah or God. That means you have a good blessing. That means no matter what is going to happen to this person, if it's a probability will be pregnant or not pregnant, you will look after this person. That killing abortion is haram.
Do you know what we're currently discussing?
Yeah.
What do you think we're discussing?
We were discussing about whether the fetus is still.
I'm discussing the point as to whether the Islamic view, as I understand it, or the Christian view that this gentleman takes, which isn't the only view, but the view he takes, is closer to that of the scientific mainstream, medical mainstream. And I think in this instance, Islam is closer. I'm not saying it's absolutely accurate, I'm not saying the logic is the same, but I'm saying insofar as you can differentiate a date, the scientific mainstream seems to say that consciousness, I didn't say the soul, consciousness becomes active in the fetus
Has to be there first.
At some point after conception, once the central nervous system and neurology started kicking in. Okay, so on that point, I think Islam is more aligned with the scientific consensus, whereas this gentleman's point of view is that I don't know if you think consciousness, do you think the soul enters? Do you think consciousness enters at the moment the egg hits the?
Absolutely, and it develops over time.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Well, we've got clear blue water. So we can agree then that whether you're right or you're wrong, because either of us could be and none of us knows for sure, it is factually accurate to say that the scientific mainstream more closely aligns with the Muslim view on this than with yours. Well, yes. I mean, you think
why is it
consciousness
okay
enters
to
at the
kill?
point...
Why is it okay to
it-
kill a human being
Wow.
who you don't perceive to have consciousness? Why is that okay?
You've just jumped the shark.
That's ultimately the problem you're going to face now.
But that's not the question we just addressed. The question was,
we're always facing what is the issue regarding if you're a universalist.
You changed the question.
Nope, it's not the same thing. If you're a universalist and you have two different opinions between Christianity and Islam for a topic,
have your 2 minutes.
Sure thing. Ultimately, if you're, you can come here. If you're a universalist and then you believe that all religions in some capacity lead to the same truth about God, but somehow you have multiple religions that have multiple different factors and factoids about certain different actions and performances, like abortion. And you have Islam, where in Islam, depending on the school you follow, it can be 40 or 120 days. And in Christianity, the widely held view is that at conception, the soul is now joined permanently with the human body. Why would you then assume that one of them is right over the other? You say, assess the data. You say, let's build a pyramid and look at which one lines up closer with, for example, you choose science to be your objective truth mechanism, so go for it. Now, when you say that Islam is more in line with science, because science gives a period in which you can perform an abortion. Sure, from that instance, they are the same.
Thank you. So you do concede that?
From the instance that they give a time period before you can legally kill somebody,
you do concede
sure
that
thing.
point.
However,
Thank
they
you.
have two completely different means by which to reach that conclusion.
I don't care about
in
the means.
Islam,
I'm interested
it's to
in the
do with the
conclusion.
development of the
I'm
fetus,
interested in the
and then within in medical science,
sorry.
in medical science, is to do with the development of a fetus. In Islam, it's supposedly to do with the writing of your destiny.
Yeah.
Those two things are not congruent whatsoever. And just because, like you've been doing this entire time, you find a very high-level comparison between multiple things, that does not mean that they are the same. That does not mean they are both correct. That does not mean they are both right, morally, or medically, in that mindset. Now, lastly, the problem you're going to have is if you claim that consciousness is the determiner by which you can ascertain whether it's right or wrong to abort, kill a child, then you need to tell me what happens when a child is born and they have no consciousness of defects. Can we then kill them on the spot? Yea or nay?
Okay, you just shotgunned out about 8 different questions and jumped off topic. No, I think, give me one question that you want addressing, because you just gave about 8. And then when I address your question, then you can address
If you are a universalist, and you claim that multiple religions can lead you to the same God, and then you have instances where those religions disagree on very fundamental things, like the sanctity of life, and you have Islam and Christianity, that give you 2 different conceptions of this. How do you then decide which one your God wants you to follow as a universalist?
Right. Press the button. Okay, the question seems to be, if I believe that all religions are speaking to the same core truths at heart, and yet they clearly have contradictions at the branch level, how do I reconcile that? And I'm slightly surprised. I'm glad you're asking me a question. It's a cool question, but we have covered this for quite some time. Clearly, when I said my answer before, maybe you weren't paying attention, I consistently said, well, you can do certain prima facie scans, okay? You can look at the data and you can go, let's at least see if it's self-consistent. We can use the principle of self-consistency to eliminate some of the assertions. So I start with the assumption that none of these anecdotal stories from 1.5 or 2,000 years ago is necessarily the absolute truth. There may be truth in them, but I don't choose to take them literally because I don't rate anecdotal evidence. I know, you take them literally because you seem to value anecdotal evidence way above what I do. I think anecdotal evidence is subservient to empirical evidence, and empirical evidence has to interact with inferential evidence, and that's how you get to make the predictions science does, which you initially claimed it doesn't do, but later you conceded it did. Play the tape back, you're still in denial. Yeah, you make a prediction in the future because you make a hypothesis and you use deduction and you frame it as an experiment, and we have covered all of this if you play the thing back. So, when there is a contradiction, if there's a contradiction between any 2 ideas, I scan them for self-consistency. In this instance, you can shake your head and I'm telling you what I do, and in this instance, do you want to just make sarcastic noises in the background?
You're not answering the question.
Okay, so I do that.
Who's right?
Forget it. I'll just have it back and I'll just stand here and make sarcastic faces at you when you talk.
Go for it.
Okay? Or give me more time.
I just keep talking.
Or you give me more time. No, I'll just walk off, because if you're just going to be sarcastic and make tutting noises and be sarcastic, we're not going to do
the question.
No, I have addressed the question.
No, you haven't.
You interrupted by making out I'm not addressing the question.
You didn't address the question.
Your viewers can decide whether or not I address the question.
Okay, fine, go for it.
You scan for self-consistencies, okay?
How?
Okay.
How do you do that?
How do you do that? Point by point basis. So the point that we picked. Wait, sorry, you interrupted me. Give me another minute.
No, you don't get another minute. It's my turn. So.
No, then I'm off. Okay, you interrupted me.
No,
you asked me a question. I was going to answer it.
What we have seen is that you.
It's on record.
By the way, sorry.
Science doesn't predict the future,
it's camera.
and it did.
Don't forget that, Mike.
And it's a shame because it went well.
Don't forget that.
It was better when Dawood was here.
Okay.
But he's ducking and diving.
All right.
So
that thing, by the way, is his. Let's get him. Right. So ultimately,
hopefully some of that
your main problem here will be that you have no actual conception.
Give you a diatribe.
That's fine. All right. Have a nice day. Okay. You have no real conception, or my friend over there has no real conception over what God is. He believes in universalism.
One question. What is the reality?
You can come with me. I've left him because he was.
I think go take him.
Okay.
Yeah,
he won't share the space. So.
All right. You've got yo Tony.
What's the reality of life? One sentence.
His.
This is it.
I don't know.
All right. Cool. So.
Is this your mic? Yeah. Are they finished?
Yeah, he's gone. He ran away.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the ultimate problem here is as follows. If you are a universalist, aka you believe in the idea that all people have their own way to God, the example of the 7 blind men touching the elephant, and then thinking that it would look like a tree or like a snake when they touch the leg and the tail. If that is your worldview, and you believe that there are multiple ways to get to God, you're making a mistake. Because ultimately, like Tony just found out, you run into a problem where different worldviews, different conceptions of God start to contradict one another. When they do this, what do you then do? Tony's answer is to look at the data and assess for consistency. In order to have a consistent principle, you have to be comparing it to something that is more true or more absolute. So in the example that I gave, when it comes to abortion laws, in Christianity versus Islam, How do we then take the two, where Islam allows you to have an abortion between 40 and 120 days, because that is when it's believed that the angels will come and write your destiny, depending on what school you follow, and when Christians hold that it happens within conception, how do you then look at the two, assess the data, and then compare for inconsistency? What are you comparing it to? He referenced science, and because currently in the medical field, there is an idea or an assertion that there is a period in which you can actually perform an abortion before the necessary cognitive features and development occur within a fetus to categorize it as a living, independent human being, that Islam is then correct. And I tell him, why are you certain that what science says concerning the development of a fetus is correct with regards to conscience? And he kept using the term that at some point the conscience will enter the child. So he's talking about, he's using science as a principle when science denies metaphysics for the most part, and therefore he's using that metaphysical aspect of a soul at one point enjoining itself with a body as a means by which you can declare that it is then therefore correct in order for you to abort a fetus for a period of time before you can consider to be a human being. I think it's absolutely wrong. We believe, for example, in Christianity, that conception and the soul all occur at once. That at conception, the soul is permanently joined to the body. If you don't believe this, then you have to substantiate in some way which process the soul enters or develops within the body. I made the claim that if consciousness develops within the fetus, in the same way eyes, ears, nose, and the mouth do, then there is something innate to the fetus that allows for it to develop in the first place. It doesn't just enter at some point. A fetus doesn't just grow. Arms don't enter a fetus at some point. Legs don't enter a fetus. They all emerge from the fetus due to its complex biological nature. And I believe that the soul and the consciousness is the same way. But he wasn't willing to admit that, and he wanted to score some points by talking about predictions of science. Ultimately, that is the problem with being a universalist. You can't sit on the fence, pick a side, and then roll with that. On my side, what I recommend, pick the side of Christ. There you go. Who said if you harm any of these young ones, that you're better off throwing yourself, or tying a millstone around your neck and throwing yourself into the sea. There you go.
Thank you. Well done, David.
No worries.
Well done, David.
Hey.